this morning comes from the book of Exodus. We are leaving behind the early matriarch and patriarch of the family, Abraham and Sarah, and their first few generations, where it was the threats to the promises of God were all eternal. The family seemed to be flying apart at the seams until finally Joseph was able to be that person who brought that forgiveness, that hope of healing and prosperity to the family. But as we pick up the story, many generations later, still in Egypt, the threats now are no longer merely the threats of the internal threats from a family, but now they are external. The threats to the faith, to the people, to the promises of God are from Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And picking up the story in chapter 1, verse 8 of Exodus. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and, in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, plastered it with bitumen and pitch, and put the child in it, and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go up and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I drew him out of the water." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
On the night of October 1st, 1943, German police, armed with the addresses of Jews, moved from door to door throughout Denmark to round up Danish Jews. Because of the political nature of the relationship between Germany and Denmark at the time, they had no help from the Danish authorities, who were under orders only to seize those who voluntarily opened their doors in response to ringing and knocking. As a result, less than 10% of the Jewish population was rounded up. Instead, nearly the entire community of Denmark's Jewish citizens, some 6,000 persons, remained in hiding, mostly in and around Copenhagen. Yet everyone knew that they could not remain hidden indefinitely. And now that the Germans had shown their hand, the Danish people knew they would have to act quickly if they were going to rescue their Jewish neighbors from the Nazis. At that time, the Swedish envoy in Copenhagen, Gustav von Dardel, promised sanctuary to all Jews who could cross the channel and make it to Sweden. The Danish people responded to this offer in kind. People from all walks of life volunteered. Doctors, school teachers, students, businessmen, taxi drivers, and housewives, among others. The organizers mobilized the Danish fishing fleet to ferry the Jews across the water to Sweden. They had to ensure that the fishermen were paid for their services and organize volunteers to bring some 6,000 Jews of Denmark down to the docks, load them onto boats, and send them off without being detected by the German police. Paying for the ferries was particularly tricky because the Danish state funds and Jewish community monies were under the watchful eye of German surveillance and could not be used. Also, the Jewish population in Denmark was not particularly well-to-do, and many did not have the cash in order to afford such a trip. Yet the people and merchants of Denmark gave and lent freely, many without asking for receipts, to ensure that all who were in danger of being seized by the Germans had the money for passage on the boats. Meanwhile, the Danish police shielded the operators by warning them of danger. Individuals helped the Jewish people sell their belongings. Taxi drivers transported the Jews to the ports. House and apartment owners often offered the victims shelter. Pastor Krohn, a local minister, even handed out blank baptismal certificates. Druggists supplied free stimulants to keep people awake, and so on. Throughout the month of October, boats carrying refugees sailed almost daily from Copenhagen. By the time the rescue operation was completed, over 6,000 Jews and nearly 700 of their non-Jewish spouses had been ferried across the water. Danish Jewry was safe in Sweden. Friends, the people of Denmark, like the Hebrew midwives long before them, faced a common decision. Would they or would they not become complicit in the evil plans of another? Both faced a powerful opponent. The Danes faced the German war machine. The midwives faced the Pharaoh of Egypt. Neither had comparable power in terms of military might, and resistance and even non-compliance against such a powerful foe meant the risk of terrible retribution. Yet in both cases, we are reminded of the power of non-violent resistance to undermine the forces of oppression in our own world today. Today, the church does not face such an obvious threat from the likes of Nazis knocking at our doors, and Pharaoh, mercifully, is long gone. Yet many social injustices remain in our society, and each of us face decisions every day in which we have to decide whether to act or remain silent. From school children who see a classmate being picked on, to shoppers at a mall who only look for the lowest prices, the bullies and the sweatshops of our world depend on our silence in order to operate. They play on our fears and our self-interest to keep us complicit in their schemes. Are you and I willing to pay more for the things we purchase if we have reasonable assurance that the higher prices will in fact allow workers to to receive a living wage, or that the products we purchased were not made in a sweatshop? Is the church willing to equip and mobilize its members to practice nonviolent resistance in order to undermine the forces that seek to exploit the vulnerable? Such forces of oppression depend on us answering no. But what if we said yes? What if the church refused to take counsel of its fears and instead mobilized its doctors, school teachers, businessmen, students, taxi drivers, and housewives into action? What if the church adopted a stance of non-violent resistance to the forces of oppression in our society today? After all, it wasn't the armies of Israel that undermined the oppressive acts of Pharaoh in Egypt. It was the midwives who refused to carry out his command. It was Moses' mother who creatively obeyed Pharaoh's command, since she did technically throw her son in the Nile, though nothing said that she couldn't put her baby in a basket first, or that the baby's sister couldn't stand nearby to watch over her. And finally, it was Pharaoh's own daughter who took pity on Moses and adopted him in open defiance of her own father's decree. All women who were granted few rights in their patriarchal society, all asked to be complicit in the oppression of others, yet all, in their own way, refused and instead chose actions that undermined the evil intent of Pharaoh at their own peril. How then can the church take action like the midwives, like Shiphrah and Puah? How can the church mobilize its members like the Danes mobilize their citizens? First, the church can help to identify the forces of oppression in our own families and society. Unlike Pharaoh or the Nazis, such forces are often less obvious and can present themselves as neutral or even benign. Yet, wherever power is out of balance, whether one is talking about economic, social, or physical power, you are likely to find one group exploiting that advantage over another. And a church that can identify and awaken its members to such unfair exploitation can take the first step to undermining the ability of those in power to exploit others by refusing complicity in their oppression. The next step the church can take is to offer alternatives that empower people to initiate change. From after-school programs that help provide opportunities for disadvantaged children to face better odds of making it in this world, to educational programs that inspire its members to support fair business practices. But the church can put the principles of our faith into action without violence in order to further undermine oppression and build a stronger community and world. Finally, the church can seek to be wise like the wolves all around us, yet innocent as lambs. The church can take its wisdom and put it to use not to concentrate power in order to exploit others, but in order to cultivate a community of faith that seeks to share God's love, share God's material blessings, and share our hope in God's Son, Jesus Christ. In this way, the church can continue to inspire all to refuse complicity with oppression and promote alternatives that remove or attack its underpinnings. In this way, the church can shine a light in the darkness, and like the midwives in Egypt and Christ after them, stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Let all God's people say,